How are we doing, guys? And welcome to a new channel. You may recognize us from the football content world. You probably won't. I don't know. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. If you're part of the championship gang, then you will. But I'm Oscar, and that is Lachlan, my friend Lachlan. Ferrari fan, if you can't tell. McLaren fan as well. And this is Tifosi Nation TV, the two most historic teams in the whole sport, F1 heritage, and we're going to discuss both of them on this podcast stroke YouTube channel. And first of all, mate, we're going to start with the race reaction to the first race of the season, the Bahrain 2024 Grand Prix, where Logan Sargent, not Logan Sargent, Max Verstappen won the race. How are things, mate?
Yeah, all good, mate. Glad we've got this channel up and running. Obviously, anyone who is watching at all, much appreciate it. And I think me and Oscar talk a lot over group chats and stuff about Formula One. So we thought, well, why not start up a channel and have a chat over here instead and get it put out there. So yeah, looking forward to this, mate.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And let's talk about the race first and foremost, not in terms of the end result. Let's just talk about the entertainment of the race. Obviously, it's been a big discussion point in the F1 media space in terms of, is Red Bull's dominance, is the gaps between the second to third teams, fourth place to fifth place teams too big now? Is it too difficult now for teams like, say, Sauber, Alpine, Williams and Haas to score points? Maybe less so Alpine, because obviously they've been pretty consistent point scorers in the last couple of seasons, but it's looking like it's going to be difficult for them to score points on a consistent basis. Is that becoming a problem for you, mate? Are you worried in terms of the season that it's just going to be basically the top five teams are going to be in the points every single week because the gap in between the teams is just too big?
Well, you look at how the race finished, the top 10, and there's no surprise really at all. I think everyone was just keeping an eye out, just one eye open, looking over at Red Bull, thinking, how good are they going to be? And obviously Verstappen has crushed all our hopes and dreams for the start of the season. But no one's really that surprised, are they, mate? No one's surprised when you look at him. 10 laps in and he was 8 seconds clear of second place. So it doesn't surprise anyone at the moment. I do think it's going to be a good season, mate. I am looking forward to it. I think it's going to be an exciting season. I think there's a lot going on. Obviously, it's the first year in God knows how many years that it's the same driver lineup, right? Same driver lineup. But we have some changes coming. We know that. Obviously, Hamilton's one of them. And I think Sainz has got a bee in his bonnet a little bit, mate, but we'll get onto that.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think one thing to mention is, I think one change from last season, well, every single season to this season since DRS has been introduced, is the DRS after one lap. I thought it worked brilliantly yesterday, to be honest. I thought you saw overtake after overtake in lap 2. Obviously you saw George Russell make the move on Charles. Yes, Charles had that brake issue, but, if Leclerc could have stayed within, say, a second of Verstappen early doors, maybe that could have made it a little bit more interesting. Listen, Verstappen still would have won the race, but we might have seen a little bit more action. Maybe Leclerc, get onto his gearbox, but it's unlikely it would have happened. But over the season, on tracks where maybe Red Bull are a little bit less dominant, a little bit less high speed, maybe that might be a feature. But I think in terms of the rest of the field, I think you're seeing a lot more moves in that sort of first 4 or 5 laps, really. There was a lot of changing of order. I think Joe Guan Yu gained about 5 places in the first 5 laps, I think. Obviously, someone else we're going to talk about in terms of people who had absolute banger races and top races. I sound like Tomo there, actually, using the word banger, but absolute legend in the YouTube F1 space. But yeah, second to fifth did change order quite a lot. I thought the first half of the race was actually 7.5 out of 10. I actually really liked the first half of the race. It was hard to tell who's going to get. It was always likely Checo was going to get second or at the very least third. He was never not going to get a podium with the pace difference on race day. But it was quite hard to tell in terms of, Russell, Leclerc with his issue, Sainz obviously coming through and being stuck behind the slower cars in that sort of first 5 or so laps. Lando wasn't a million miles away in that first sort of stint on the soft tyres. Obviously, it did in the second bit of the race. It needed a safety car probably or something just to kind of dramatise it a little bit. I thought we might have got that with Logan Sargent. But yeah, there seems to be a lot of technical faults on all the cars. The brake bias was miles off on the Ferrari, on Leclerc's Ferrari, in terms of I think it was 100 degrees out. I think in terms of the steering angle and stuff like that. So it was quite crazy. It was a typical first race kind of thing. The only thing that wasn't typical was there was no DNFs, which is very. I don't think that's ever happened on race one. There's always something, a slight issue in terms of on one of the cars, and yeah, it's quite amazing. That I thought for sure it was going to be one of the Alpines that was going to have some kind of technical faults on it. In fact, they've had to put another hole in the car effectively to stop it overheating. That's not the technical phrase for it, but that was interesting. But I didn't think it was that bad a race. I thought it was a better race over the whole spectacle than probably most of the 2023 races. It wasn't a banger by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought it was okay.
I enjoyed it. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think Russell looked pacey, didn't he, in that first half? He looked like he could have got a podium. I mean, he finished fifth, didn't he? So Hamilton's struggling a little bit. I think Russell, I don't know if you noticed, mate, he spent a lot of the weekend talking about how Mercedes have built this car around Hamilton, around Lewis. And, was that a bit of a kind of getting the excuses in early if things went wrong? But I mean, he outperformed Hamilton in qualifying as well, right? He qualified ahead of Hamilton as well.
2.5 attempts he had on him on Q3. I think it was closer for Q1 and Q2. Mercedes were miles away from the second row. It was looking more like going to be like a sixth and seventh, on the starting grid. And then Russell, just to be fair to him, I think it was a little bit of Russell producing a fantastic lap, and Hamilton. I think he did mention he sets his car up more for the race, which has kind of been a theme with Lewis in the last sort of year and a half, really. Since certainly since these new regulations, he's put a lot of. He was the qualifying master in the previous regulations and throughout his career. And I think now he has put much more focus on the race. I'm not sure technically why that is, but it is something we've seen. He's been a lot quicker in the races than Russell in general. Maybe not yesterday. But qualifying, Russell, he's certainly at the very least even to Hamilton in that case. I don't think anyone's, in terms of teammates, has got this close to Hamilton on one lap pace. We're talking your Alonso's, your Jenson Buttons, your Nico Rosbergs. I don't think they ever got this close to Hamilton on one lap pace. And yes, this isn't Lewis at his absolute peak. There's no doubt about that. But it's still fair play to Russell. I mean, we do need to talk about Max. There has been a big thing. We mentioned about in the the media space that he's bad for F1 in terms of entertainment. This is something, even as a Ferrari fan, a die-hard Ferrari fan, you have to give credit to Max Verstappen. You are witnessing a genius at the wheel. You are witnessing 100%. An all-timer here.
Yeah, mate, unreal. I think you get the usual spiel from not even Hamilton fans, but just other F1 fans in general, just saying, well, it's only the car, it's the only reason. But I mean, even when Red Bull were off it, when Verstappen first joined the team, he was doing very well. He was coming up with surprise podiums here and there, and he's just
race wins. Each season
he's an elite,
winning 2 or 3 races a year. When it's sort of through to 17, through to 20.
Yeah. He's an elite driver, and he just doesn't seem to have off days, especially on the race, right? On the Sunday, or in this case, the Saturday. He doesn't have those off days. I think 2 seasons ago, he had
apart from when he drives at Singapore, though.
That's true.
He does turn into Latifi at Singapore. We have to be honest.
Yeah.
If he wins at Singapore this year, he's going to get 200 race wins. It's like it is genuinely over if he wins at Singapore this year.
It's crazy, mate. And I don't know if you saw it. So he's got how many? He's 3 away, 3 race wins away now from breaking his own record of consecutive race wins
that he set last year.
Yes. So I don't think there's any doubt he's going to win the championship this year, right? I think everyone knows that. And it's going to be interesting. I think everyone else is kind of just praying and hoping something blows up a little bit in Red Bull's side with the whole Horner situation. Can the team implode basically, and what effect that will have? But I can't see it having an effect on the track in terms of Verstappen. He'll still go out there every weekend and just put in 10 out of 10 every single week. He's unstoppable, mate. Adrian Newey is a genius, just like Verstappen is a genius, and they just don't look like they're going to be stopped. I think he's going to break the record for championships if Red Bull continue even anywhere near how they've been the last few years. And he'll, Max, by the end of his career, he could well be considered the GOAT, because of what he's doing now if that continues. So
Yeah, 100%. I think in terms of race wins, I think Lewis 103, I think, or 104. I know it's into the hundreds. Max, what's Max on now? Is it 55? Was it? I think now he's on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
something like that.
so you're thinking, in terms of the next 2 years in these regulations, you'd have to fancy Max is going to win minimum kind of 15. I think it's going to be more like into the late teens, to be honest. I mean, it could even be 20s, this season potentially. So it's very
26 years
possible.
old, mate, as well. 26.
Yeah,
He's
no,
got a lot of
100%.
time.
I still think in terms of equaling Hamilton and Schumacher's 7 titles, I think it's going to still be hard work. In terms of just because of the regulation change that's coming up, in terms of Red Bull obviously building their own engine. Listen, they could absolutely nail it, but I do think it might be a little bit of a change in the order in 2026. I think in terms of the teams, but of course Max could do a Seb and move to the second or first best team like Seb did back in 2015. And listen, Seb was a similar one in terms of when up to like sort of 2013, he was on there with 4 titles, same age as Max, and he never won another one. So it is hard, to win that many titles. You do have to get the career moves spot on. I'm not saying, Schumacher and Hamilton, I've got this big talent gap on Max. I think it's just about, as much as anything, it's about picking the right teams. Your Fernando Alonso's, for example, totally the end of the scale in terms of picking the right teams in that lot. And yeah, so it is, I think it will be tough to, I'm not saying you can't do it. It depends how long he stays in F1 for. He's obviously always spoken about racing other disciplines, Le Mans, and, different. I can see him doing that, to be honest. I think I can see him being in racing at the very least till he's, into his late 30s, 40s, possibly, a bit of an Alonso in that respect. Will it be all in F1? Who knows? But what Max Verstappen and Adrian Newey have done since the second half of 2022 is like what Tiger Woods has done with golf or what Lionel Messi did with football. You're seeing stats and records be broken that we've never, ever seen in the sport before. Yeah. Now, listen, I don't think he's in the GOAT conversation yet with your Sennas, your Schumachers and your Hamiltons. I think we still need to see Max over a longer period of time. At least another 2 or 3 years for me. Maybe after these regulation changes, maybe in a less dominant car, can he still produce the same level of dominance? But people would argue he's in the GOAT conversation. Fair enough. I'm not going to argue too much about that at all because, as I say, what you are seeing him do, I don't think you'll ever see again in F1. I don't think you'll ever see a driver win 10 races in a row and then follow it up with another likely record. I think he will get those, at least into the 11, 12 wins on the bounce. You're looking at the tracks coming up for Red Bull: Saudi Arabia, high-speed track; Australia, again, Red Bull were pretty dominant there last time around; Japan, Red Bull, absolutely complete annihilation last year and the year before; China, obviously, we're a little bit less sure of in terms of no one's raced there for a while. But it's looking like there's at least 4 wins on the bounce on the table. Without reliability problems, he's probably going to get to about 11 or 12 wins on the bounce. You won't see this happen again for me. I don't think. Maybe he will, but I can't see it. I think like Tiger Woods and Messi, it'll be difficult to follow in this kind of peak. And it's hard to accept as a Ferrari fan, but it is what it is. All you can hope for is that he has a more competitive teammate over time. But we'll see. Checo was decent yesterday, to be fair. But that was one of Checo's best races since the start of last season, and he was still 22 seconds behind him. He was still kind of 0.3 of a second a lap behind Max. It didn't feel like Max was fully, because as you said before, the 8 seconds in 10 laps, Max is a specialist at doing that. In terms of pulling that gap out early and then just managing his tyres through to the rest of the race and managing his pace and, kind of just eking out 2 or 3 tenths a lap from there. I do still think he could actually won by 30 seconds if he was fully pushing. But why would you push?
Remember that spot? Was it Spa? Was it Spa last year where he was just clear? It was Spa maybe the year before where he was
Spa both times. I mean, he came from
both times
to first in 22 in Spa. That was incredible, to be fair. And he still won by 20 seconds.
I mean, I think this is what people are saying, because look, I when the 2021 season, I wanted Max to win that championship, and I think it was just because it would have been it was his first, right? And Lewis had won so many, and I thought, it's always nice to have a change in the guard at the top, and I was excited for Max, and I didn't really think it would go on this long.
This dominance,
but it's different to the Mercedes dominance era, I think, because you had Bottas coming up with wins every now and then, and even further back, Rosberg and even Verstappen was popping up with a win here and there, back then. But now,
Danny Ricks, you've said Vettels and
yes.
Leclerc obviously coming through at Ferrari and that lot. It was
yeah. But now you can't see anyone. There's no race weekend where I go into and thinking, oh, this driver could win it instead here. It's just the first name is Max, and I don't look past him, mate. Unless there's a surprise pole here or there, which there is sometimes. It's just, it's always Max in my eyes who's going to win it. So.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I could easily see there is a legitimate case that Max could win every race this season. I don't think it will happen. I think even last season, if it was going to happen, I think it probably was last season where he was going to win every race. But obviously, technical faults do happen. In that Red Bull car, not so much the last couple of seasons, but in terms of the concept they've gone with, that has been. I'm not going to go into technical talk and pretend I know what I'm talking about here, but there has been talk about it could have some reliability issues from time to time, potentially, because it's such an aggressive sort of concept they've gone with in terms of the car. So I personally do think, and this might be to lose the Ferrari fan in me, but you're seeing in the quali pace, I think Ferrari are probably at most sort of a 10th off, but I think they're probably equal on a lot of tracks. Listen, on some tracks, Red Bull will be clear. I think next weekend at Saudi, high speed, Red Bull are clear of Ferrari in that kind of sense. But a place like Monaco and street tracks, I do think Ferrari have closed the gap compared to where it was this time last year. In terms of this time last year, on race pace and quali pace, Ferrari were at least kind of 5 or 6 tenths off. At least 5 or 6. Certainly on the race day. Yesterday, it was hard to tell yesterday, obviously, because Carlos was stuck in traffic. Charles had the issue with the brakes. But once that kind of settled itself down, it probably was more down to about 3 tenths kind of thing in terms of the second stint. Again, I still need to fully go through the data in that lot, but it was a lot closer on the second stint. Again, after one race, it's hard to sort of gauge everything in that kind of sense. But I do think Ferrari are probably closest by far of the chasing pack at this moment in time. Maybe McLaren have got something in store. Obviously, we'll come to that in a second. But places like Monaco, where Charles theoretically could put it on pole and it's difficult to overtake, I still have hope on tracks like that. And tracks where it is, tight corners, there's heavily reliance on how the car rotates, around the track and that lot. I do think those tracks could suit Ferrari. I'm not going to say I don't think there'll be any time this season where Ferrari are outright better than Red Bull, but I do think there'll be times this season where it might be down to a 10th or 2 tenths on race day, which, Charles Leclerc on his day, I think he's becoming more and more consistent. Certainly on race and quali pace, it's 6 races in a row where he's been on the front row in quali against arguably the most dominant car of all time. So there's definitely a case for. Charles actually had the quickest qualifying time of the whole weekend. And
Q2 wasn't it? Q2.
Nothing sums up Ferrari and obviously Charles' luck that they just got his strategy wrong in Q3 and he couldn't replicate it. But there's pace in that Ferrari, certainly on quali pace. They've spoken about the tyre deg improving, but there wasn't really any evidence of that yesterday. But I do think on certain tracks where it's less high speedy, Barcelona, Hungary, I think the gap's less than what it was at the start of last season. Now, listen, the start of last season is not a great barometer to have because Red Bull were stupidly clear. Checo wasn't driving particularly well, and he was still getting first, he's still getting winning the odd race, and he's finishing second pretty much every weekend. So I still have hope that Red Bull will absolutely run away with the drivers in terms of Max. There's no doubt about it. Max will at least win the championship by at least 200 points, maybe even last year's gap, which I think was 300 points on Checo. Easily could see that happening. But if the field is tighter this season, I think you saw it a little bit yesterday. Sainz was only 3 seconds off Perez. And Sainz did have traffic. Maybe in terms of the constructors, in terms of Ferrari are going to have to be consistent, or McLaren also, they're going to have to be incredibly consistent. But with Checo there as second driver, I'm still not convinced when the lights are brightest whether Checo will be getting the consistent points to make it as clear in the constructors. Red Bull are very clear favourites.
You're saying Ferrari might win the constructors, mate?
No, I'm saying they can push. I say they can push, but I can't see it. But there is a case for it. If Checo's like what he was in the second half of last season, it's totally reliant on Max because you can't just burst through the field as easily as last year. Last year you could start 15th and still finish on the podium. This season, I do think it'll be more difficult to do that. Because you only have to look at the quality of the, say the other top 3 teams behind Red Bull, the quality of driver they've got. It's hard to overtake. Even saw yesterday, Perez trying to overtake Russell. It wasn't, it took a couple of laps to do it, in terms of, getting past Russell. So I do think, listen, Red Bull are going to win both races. And yes, there is a bit of coping here. Both championships. But the constructors, I could see it being tighter than what people think. Certainly tighter than what the last couple of seasons have been. I do think Ferrari, Sainz is driving as well as he's ever driven in the Ferrari. Not just because of yesterday, but I think the second half of last season, places like Singapore, his Monza drives, things like that. He's probably driving. I don't think he's as good as Leclerc in any kind of sense. In terms of that is something Sky are trying to push, but he's nowhere near Leclerc's level. But a more consistent Sainz, who knows? Ferrari can pick up the odd surprise win. Maybe they can get within like sort of 100 points on the constructors and give a little bit of hope. Because you mentioned 2021 there. It was at the end of the regulations. You always see at the end of the regulations, it close up. And that's, for me as a Ferrari fan, it's probably the same as you as a McLaren fan. I just want hope in that last season when you probably do see the performance start to plateau a little bit, the field's really close together, just that little bit of hope that they could have a bit of a go in 2025. At this moment in time, it's not going to happen. I didn't see enough yesterday to say it could happen. But on other tracks, when I say other tracks, I'm talking at most 3 or 4 tracks a year, to be honest. In terms of your Monacos and that lot. And we know what Charles' look is like in Monaco. It's the same as Max's look in Singapore. So it is going to be tough. But let's just talk about as well, before we go on to McLaren, because I do want to chat to you about quite a bit about McLaren from yesterday. Let's talk about some of the notable drives from yesterday. I want to talk first of all about Zhou Guanyu in that what looks like a pretty awful Zauber. He was in the points at one point, and then it seemed like a mess up on the strategy allowed Lance Stroll to get past him.
I was surprised, mate. I was surprised. I mean, Bottas wasn't Bottas 19th, mate. Sorry, I haven't got the. I think
Bottas. He had that Nico Hulkenberg and Stroll incident on the first corner. I think Bottas did get caught up in that, so he dropped to 18th at the start of the race, and then had a 52-second pit stop. And I think he did finish. Let me tell you, he was 19th. He finished.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, look, this is what we're saying. It's exciting when you see drivers like Guanyu, who's that far up, in 11th place yesterday. I think, by the way, that car looks beautiful. I think.
Yeah, it does. I love it.
It looks
in
great.
The night race as well. It works.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, absolutely, mate. But yeah, I've seen a lot of criticism. Actually, I don't know if you saw it. There was a lot of criticism online because I know that there was a bit of kind of talk about Yuki Tsunoda. Someone said he's only at that team because, well, of his nationality, really, in terms of
connection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I'm also seeing commercial as well for Zhou as well. I'm seeing talk of that. A bit of criticism saying that he shouldn't be in his seat. I think it's a little bit harsh, if I'm honest. But he did well yesterday, mate. And again, it's just another sign that things are closer in the midfield and towards the bottom. And drivers, at teams like at Sauber can push for points. I think all season long. I think they'll be able to. It's not just and it helps as well that Alpine look like they're in for a really poor season. There's another two cars that. It frees up space in that fight for the points, I suppose. They'll be fighting for points. Don't get me wrong, Alpine, but teams like Sauber and Williams, they could easily finish above them and in the points. So it backs up really, mate, that the talk of an exciting season when it comes to the midfield and towards the end, there's going to be a lot of fighting back there. Yeah, mate, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think that battle for sort of like 9th and 10th place will be pretty good each week, really. I think the problem is, I think the 5. So I think you've got a 5 and then a 5 kind of thing, or a 1 and a 4, obviously Red Bull, and then a 4 and then a 5 kind of thing. I think the gap between, say, Aston and even, I think RB probably left a lot of performance on the table. Certainly in qualifying, I think both Yuki and Daniel looked really disappointed with. Certainly Daniel, I think he really felt there was a lot more on the table. I think he saw in testing, I thought, in terms of Visa Cash App, or let's just call them Racing Bulls. Let's agree on this podcast to call them Racing Bulls. Racing Bulls. None of this Visa Cash App nonsense anyway. But yeah, I think Racing Bulls may be at the front of that kind of pack, but the gap between them and Aston is very big. And that's the only issue. I think the racing between those 5 teams, I think, will be brilliant, because you have got chaotic drivers within it, in terms of Yuki, K-Mag, Ocon, Gasly, who they love to lose a front wing on the first lap kind of thing. Obviously, you saw Nico do that, and listen, Nico Hulkenberg's qualifying alone could definitely put Haas into the conversation, in terms of he always gets himself into Q3. It's hard to gauge what that Haas is like, but I do think the racing between those 5 teams could be brilliant this season. I thought you saw a bit of it yesterday, but can they narrow that gap to Aston Martin, that they can get consistent points? That's the big question. I think Stroll is gettable, but Fernando, he's going to be in the points it's Fernando. He will be in the points every single week, but maybe
he's going to get everything out of the car he can, mate. Alonso will get everything out of the car he can. Yeah.
He was still he was comfortably 9th, in terms of it was no question he was always going to be in the points. And Stroll really, listen, another really good drive from Lance Stroll, in terms of he actually finished last season pretty well, from 20th to 10th. It's a fair play to him. In the end, it was a really strong drive from him. And he seemed to start last season well as well, if I recall correctly. He did
with his broken wrists.
Yeah. And no nighttime activities as Lando Norris. I know we saw it on DTS, so Drive to Survive. There's no nighttime activities for Lance either. Maybe he stopped doing that as well, and it's got the performance out of him. I don't know, mate. But yeah, impressive from Stroll.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. I think again, when we're talking about criticism and doubt over whether someone deserves their seat, there's always talk of Stroll just because of his dad, really. Has he only got that seat because of his dad? But and I think at times it's fair criticism, but he does seem to come up clutch sometimes, mate. And he does look like a tidy little driver. He'd won championships, right, in F2. I think he did win an F2 championship.
Yeah,
I'm sure he did.
Exactly, but I think he was in the dominant car. Not to take too much away from him, but I think he was in the dominant car. Was it F2 or F3? I can't recall. People in the comments let us know.
F3 maybe, mate. Yeah.
I think he was up against Russell one year, but I think he was a much better car, I believe. And people might correct me in the comments. Again, it's an interesting one with Stroll, but yeah, mate. Sorry, I disturbed you there. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Yeah, I was just saying, mate, I think there's always going to be doubts when your dad, is the president or whatever. There's questions there like, is he only in that seat because of his dad? And I think in the Drive to Survive, for example, I think was it the first episode? I think was the Stroll episode. His dad and him have a really good racing bond, and I think they want to win everything together.
You saw a different side of that. I know, obviously, Drive to Survive tried. I've always had this perception of Lance of being quite entitled, I think is the word for it. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I've always had this view of Lance Stroll being entitled, and I wouldn't say he obviously definitely cares. There's no doubt about it. His commitment to come back last season with the broken wrist and that lot, but he's always come across as not one of the most likable drivers in the world in terms of personality. Not just in terms of talent, his personality, but to be fair, he actually comes across well in Drive to Survive.
He does, mate. He does. I think you had that incident as well last year with his mechanic, where he or his personal trainer or something, giving him a little shove, and he grew up a little bit differently to some of the drivers. I know many of the drivers grew up very rich and entitled, but and he was one of them. And there is that worry that is he a little bit entitled and all of that, but and I'm sure he can throw his toys out of the pram, which he seemed to do last year at some points. But he looks like a good driver, mate. I don't think he deserves to lose his seat. I think some of the doubts
in F1 or Aston, or do you mean F1 in general or Aston when you say lose his seat?
Aston, okay. I think he's doing okay. I think look. I don't think Lawrence Stroll is going to get rid of his son anyway. I can't see it happening. No. I can't see it happening. But how long he can stay there, I don't know. I mean, if they improve the car and if they want to fight for championships, which Aston Martin claim they want to do, I don't think they can do that with Lance Stroll. But if they're happy with where they are at the moment, then I think, and fighting for maybe third or fourth, I think he's fine, mate. I think it's a decent driver lineup, them two. But remember, Alonso hasn't got a seat pass this season, has he? As it stands.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we need to talk a little bit about Alonso. He did seem, it's one of the few times in recent years with Alonso I've seen him not fight for position, kind of thing. In terms of when faster cars going past, it did seem a bit of a different Fernando in that kind of sense. In terms of, I just don't think he backs the car. I think he thought if he tried to push it to the limit, I just don't think he had that much confidence in it. In terms of whatever reason for that was, who knows? But I'm going to say it right away. I think Fernando's Mercedes in the next couple of weeks is going to become more and more of a thing now. I think now that you've seen what Aston have done this weekend in terms of probably see it Saudi, because Saudi have read up that they're going to be pretty poor in Saudi, they think, because it's the high speed elements of it. It's more of a track that suits your tighter. Obviously, Saudi is a street track, but it suits your Monaco, Singapore type street tracks, by the looks of things. And that was the case last season. I do think if the performance dips with that Aston, you will see more talk of Alonso leaving. I think the fact that some of the language he's used this season compared to last is quite interesting. But I think more so than ever with the driver lineup, if Alonso goes, I think it's harder for Lance Stroll. Listen, I think Lance Stroll will keep his place, but in terms of Aston getting into the McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari kind of territory, I do think they probably need to upgrade on Lance. I don't think they'll do it, but I think it has hit that. It's hit that point now where Aston are very much looking forward now. It's not like last season where it was a case of, we're doing better. Can we maintain this? Obviously, they didn't maintain the level they were at the start of the season, but there's no doubt about it. Aston are at their best place, certainly a much better place than they were at the end of 2021 or the start of 2022 when Seb was there. So it has got to a point now, especially if Alonso goes, say if Fernando goes and they promote, I don't know, Yuki into the seat because of the Honda connection going into 2026.
Yeah.
He and Lance, I'm not sure. I think it's harder.
I hear what you're saying, mate. That's
what I'm saying. It's a hard one at that point. I don't see that as a lineup that gets you into your McLaren kind of territory without big, development on the car.
Yeah. I think I don't know what it's like at board level, Aston Martin. I mean, I don't know who has the final say. I mean, is it Lawrence? Because I said, watching Drive to Survive and stuff, mate, it sounds like Lawrence is just all in on Stroll. He has to be there. Lance has to be there. And as I said, mate, they want to win championships. They want to fight for championships at the minimum. And I just don't think you can do that with Lance Stroll in your team. And then you're losing Fernando Alonso. Who can you bring in? Who can you tempt into the team? There's a worry that they start next season with a really poor driver lineup, and that's a problem. If you want to keep improving as a team, you need the best lineup you can possibly get, drivers to get the absolute maximum out of the car, which Fernando does seem to do most of the time. And without Fernando, and then you're stuck with Lance and somebody else, there's problems, mate. There's doubts. So.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Maybe Checo might go back as if Checo's still at Red Bull. There's a lot of different. They'll have options on the table, Aston Martin, because it's a consistent point scoring car. I think we've seen that in testing and the race, and there will be certain tracks where I think Aston might be in that McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari conversation on pace. But I don't think over the season, there's not the only two positions I'm sure of on the constructors' table is Red Bull will win it, and Aston Martin will finish fifth. That's the only two positions I'm sure of. I just can't. I think there'll be such a gap between them to fourth and them to sixth. I just think they are screaming. They're screaming fifth for me, like last season in the constructors, and probably less points as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting over the season how that dynamic kind of adjusts really. And let's talk a bit about McLaren then, mate. Because obviously in qualifying, Lando wasn't happy in terms of his own performance in Q3. He felt there was a possible front row. I think that might be stretching it a little bit, but certainly second row on the table there for Lando.
I think they both said, mate, that they felt that the car could have made the front two rows. I think they said. I think they're happy with their pace over one lap. I just think Lando had a tricky Q3, a couple messy laps. I think there's no doubt, mate, that they are way ahead of where they were this time last year. I mean, in that opening race last year, I think it was poor, mate. Did they both finish out? I think they both finished out the
Both
points.
out the points. Yeah. I mean,
And
last 2 seasons that's happened with McLaren.
Yeah, and they turned the season around very well, mate. Obviously, as we know, I mean, there's the standout for me where the turning point was probably Silverstone last season, where they came out and they just looked, like I think Lewis Hamilton described it, mate, as a rocket ship, with Lando going past him. So I think it's exciting, mate. I mean, they finished obviously P6, P8, which I think it's a respectable finish. I think they would have obviously wanted to be higher, but like we've spoken about, you've got Max and Checo, obviously, who are expected to be out of touch anyway, and then Sainz, Leclerc, Russell, and in other weeks you're going to have Hamilton there as well, and probably Alonso. So it's just so tough. Third place down, really, it's going to be very difficult. I was hoping for a podium from Lando, to be fair, mate. Maybe that was wishful thinking, but as I said, I think it's really promising that they are a lot more. They're a lot better than they were this time last year, and I think there's a lot of room for growth. I think Zach Brown spoke about he's cautiously excited for where they're going to be in a few races. A few months down the line. And if you look at maybe after the summer break, mate, again, kind of similar time to last year where they seemed to turn it around. I'm excited to see where they might be at, mate. I think Lando and Oscar could be easily getting podiums towards the second half of this season. I think they'll be fighting with Ferrari, mate, and obviously that'll be exciting for me and you to talk about that closer to the time. But don't get me wrong, I think at this stage Ferrari are clear 100%. I think they will finish above McLaren most races for the foreseeable. But come second half of the season, I'm optimistic.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually think next weekend at Saudi, I think McLaren will be in front of Ferrari. I think you've seen last season, obviously the car is different this season to last season. We're not fully seeing what tracks suit which cars yet, but certainly based on the second bit of last season, I'm thinking like Qatar last year, I actually think that was the closest McLaren got to Red Bull, really. And that and Silverstone, in terms of the high-speed tracks, seem to really play into, that McLaren strengths. And I look at, Saudi, Japan coming up as well. We saw how strong McLaren were at Japan last year. It was Oscar's first podium. And it was a clear podium, that as well. I think they had a good sort of 10, 15 seconds on the Ferrari and Mercs that particular race weekend. So, I certainly look at those two races and think, McLaren could accumulate some big points there. So in terms of, I was happy with third and fourth from Ferrari yesterday. I think we maximised the potential of the race in terms of points wise. But by no means do I think it's going to be an easy second place and easily best of the rest. I think it's going to be really tight. between us, Mercedes and McLaren this season. In terms of the driver lineup quality between all three teams is pretty even, I'd say as well. Really, I think you've got. Each of the teams has got a superstar driver, in terms of Lewis, Lando, Charles. Obviously, you have to say Lewis is the best of the three. But then you've got behind them very, very capable second drivers, George, Carlos, and Oscar. And I think Oscar this season is only going to get better on the race pace. I think on quali pace, he's very, very close to Lando already. And maybe over the season, might even start to be better than Lando on the quali pace. Who knows?
It's a fair shout.
Based on this improvement, in terms of from how good he was last year, if he maintains, obviously Lando's going to improve all the time as well. But I think Oscar's still got a steep curve to improve on in that regard. But the race pace is where it can improve the most. And again, from one race, it's hard to just judge it. But he did seem a little bit close to Lando on race pace yesterday, where it was a little bit closer. Whether it was a slightly quiet day for Lando on performance, and he might have been just managing the tyres a little bit. Who knows? But that McLaren are an interesting one to me this season. Andrea Stella as well. This is his first car, effectively. The previous car was a Seidel car, and a James Key car as well. And you've seen how well they're doing at Sauber. So, it's one of those. It is interesting, but I certainly think they're in by far their best place. I'd probably say their best place certainly since 21, the end of the last regulations. But I'd go back to, Hamilton McLaren days, in terms of since McLaren's had this kind of buzz around it and genuinely being able to live up to the hype and get, consistent points. Because McLaren were the second best car in the second half of last season. I felt. I think I think Ferrari did come on strong. We came on strong in that last 5 or 6 races. But McLaren, consistency-wise, I thought consistently kind of at least second or third best car.
For sure.
Onwards.
I'd agree, mate, because I think towards the end of the season there was even talk like, I mean, I know there was a couple of races where Lando, qualified P2, and it was kind of like, can Lando get a race win here? You know what I mean? And that's crazy because of how dominant Verstappen was, and still is, obviously. But the second half of last season, it was kind of like Lando could get a race win here, and we're still waiting for that Lando race win. I think McLaren, they need to give Lando a car capable of I don't want to say winning, because obviously you've got Verstappen there, but competing. Because I think there was, if McLaren continued like they had been the previous few years, Lando would have had to have left. He would have to, and maybe Red Bull is an option there. Maybe it is still an option for the future, Red Bull, mate. But I think that he's a great driver, Lando, and he deserves a car capable of competing. And it looks like he is getting that now. He looks like he has a car that is capable of finishing on the podium. So that's exciting, mate. I think it's what he deserves, and hopefully he can finally turn that into more podiums and hopefully a win soon. I just get nightmares still, mate, about Russia. You remember that race? I mean, it was just. It was pain, mate. It was pain. It was more pain than you've ever had. No, it was rough.
I mean, it was that Russia incident, I think, really kick-started Hamilton's title bids in 2021. I think had that not happened, Russia, just to try and soften the blow a little bit, I don't think you'd have had the same last 4 or 5 races between Verstappen and Hamilton. I think it was crucial, absolutely critical Hamilton won that race at that point in the season. So I think it was just after the Monza crash between Verstappen and Hamilton as well. But that's just trying to soften the blow. I always say that to you and Matt.
Yeah.
The McLaren fans know we always try and soften the blow with that, in terms of at least it gave us an unbelievable
it did.
Final 4 or 5 races of the season that year. But Lando will win a race for me this season. I'm actually going to say will win a race.
I really hope so. Yeah.
24 races. All right, 23 to go. I think that McLaren, development-wise, I do think there's still a lot more to do there. But I think, I do think Lando will win a race this year. I also think Charles will win a race this year in the Ferrari. I do genuinely believe that. Mercedes, I think Mercedes. The thing with them is that it's. I don't think they're ever. It's hard to tell with Mercedes how good or bad the car is, because obviously yesterday they had the power unit issues on both cars. But it did feel like the last 2 seasons they've never really had. Not very often. Obviously, there has been some races. Australia last year, they've never really consistently had the second best car. It's always been the third best car, and the other teams have moved around them. They've just kind of to say if it's like a ladder. Mercedes has stayed there. Sometimes McLaren have gone here. Sometimes McLaren have gone there. Sometimes Ferrari have gone here. Sometimes Ferrari have gone there, kind of thing. In terms of the pecking order, if you like. But that, to me, in terms of McLaren and Ferrari, it feels more likely they'll win a race because of that than Mercedes will. People disagree with that in the comments, etc., etc. Listen, if Lewis Hamilton's in a situation where he can win a race, he will win that race for me. USA last year, really, a couple more laps there. Maybe he would have got past the finish line first. I say past the finish line first because obviously he got disqualified. We all know that story, etc., etc. But that was probably one where, that was. I think that's the closest Mercedes have got, other than Brazil 22. But I do think Ferrari and McLaren can win it, and maybe Mercedes as well. I do think I'd be surprised if only 2 teams or 1 team just won the race this year. I do think there'll be more different race wins this year. I do genuinely think Max will still totally dominate, as we kind of already alluded to. But I do think, because I think if Max has an issue with his car, I'm not sure I'm still backing Checo to definitely. He could win the race, but I'm not saying he'll definitely win the race, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I do think it'll be very open then. If something happens to the power unit, an absolute shocker in quali where the power unit goes or something goes, there is a scenario there, or Singapore again, there is a scenario there where other teams can win a race this year. But who knows? Let's talk about. We've spoken a little bit about teammates and that lot. We've got some teammate rivalries cooking here. We've got some rivalries cooking. I mean, I'll start. Do you want to start with Danny Rick and Yuki first and
Yeah,
foremost?
mate. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about Danny Rick.
Let's give the context, okay, behind that. Yuki starts the race 3 places in front of Danny Rick, 11th and 14th on the grid. In terms of the start of the race, Yuki is on Zhou Guanyu's gearbox to start with in the race, but can't get past in that kind of sense. There's alternate strategies. I can't remember the exact order at that point when they made the kind of like last round of pit stops. But at that point in the race, towards the end, Danny Rick was behind Yuki. Yuki was trying to get past K-Mag. Danny Rick had the softer tyres and the fresher tyres, of course. Because I think Yuki was on mediums. People might correct me in the comments, but off memory, I think Yuki was on the mediums or the hards at that point.
Yeah. Lap 52, mate.
Yeah, lap 52. Yeah, and Yuki was asked to swap position to give Danny Rick the chance to overtake. Yuki didn't do it for a lap. Kind of had a bit of a typical Yuki on the radio. Listen, I was laughing. I was pissing myself as this was going on. It was just like classic Yuki. Eventually lets Danny Rick past in the weirdest points of the track possible as well. Not on the straight, in terms of on that sort of tight kind of section on sector 2 where the track just goes crazy kind of thing. In terms of rotation and stuff like that on the car, it was a very weird place to let Danny Rick pass. And I think Martin Brundle alluded to it as well. Danny Rick, I don't think he was ever going to get past K-Mag anyway. I think it was too far back, and it didn't really matter because they were too far back on the points. And that's kind of it, really. And Yuki did not see. Yuki's side of the argument is, why did you swap us? What's the point in swapping us? I was faster than Daniel. I think he even said on the radio, he's not even that fast, which is like wild, really, but it's Yuki. And Danny Rick said they agreed it beforehand. So if Danny Rick's side of the story is true, I'm siding with Danny Rick, to be honest with you. It's a bit harsh on Yuki, but you can't go reacting like that in the cool down lap. Like, basically, almost crashing the car.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's just quickly mention that. Obviously, the cool down lap, I think Tsunoda dive bombed Danny Rick, and then he locked up. Yuki locked up when he did that, and then obviously he comes back onto track and again nearly takes him out, nearly takes Ricciardo out. So I think Ricciardo came on the radio and called it. He called him a helmet. That was it. He called Yuki a helmet.
I've not heard that insult used for a while. It's proper 2010s insult, that, isn't it?
Yes, it is, mate. But yeah, as you said after the race, Danny Rick said that it was immature and that they did discuss before the race that it was likely that Danny Rick would end up on softs. And even if there's a chance that Danny Rick can overtake K-Mag at that point, I think you team orders, you let him through and you see what he can do. And obviously, neither of them were going to get points. If there's not, there was no
kind of in terms of just on the points, in terms of anything could happen. Like, say Fernando Alonso's car just broke down, all of a sudden, then it's on, this game on, isn't it? And then you kind of waste the reality is there was a 99% chance that they were never not going to get points at that point. But that small 1%, and it's not just because of that. It's later in the season when Yuki needs to get past Daniel or vice versa. It's just created an unnecessary, awkward dynamic.
Yeah, and I think I can't remember who said it, on Sky afterwards. But they said, Yuki is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, but when he's in the car, and it's different. And visors down. It's the same for all of them, mate. These are sportsmen at the end of the day, and they want to finish above their teammate because, that's the only person they can be compared against is their teammate in terms of the similarity in the car. And I think that they're always going to want to finish as high as possible. So it's not really. Team orders. This always happens with team orders. There's always talk about whether the driver wants to do it or whether the driver should react well or not. And in this case, I think it was a little bit too far from Yuki. I think if it was, it's not like it was for 10th place. Yuki was 10th, Danny Rick was 11th. It's not like they lost out on any points whatsoever. So I just think it was uncalled for. And as you said, it's created an unnecessary kind of rift, if you want to call it that. Or a bit of tension in the team. I'm sure that they're both really nice guys, Yuki and Danny Rick. I'm sure they'll probably just squash it, and that's it. It'll probably be done and dusted. But like you said, next time team orders come into play between them two, you never know what might happen. Something might kick off.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I was going into the season thinking of all the potential teammate battles, Yuki and Daniel was probably bottom, to be honest, in the list. Really, I had a lot. There was like Ocon and Gasly straight away. I was thinking, you can see that blowing up again. I think it will blow up again at some point in the season. That or Bottas and Zhou, they seem to be quite close as well. But I think all the other pairings are thinking, there could be something that kicks off at some point there. It will be interesting over the season. And I don't think it's done Yuki Tsunoda any favours in terms of his Red Bull future, because that was already, not because of his performances are poor, it's the quality that Red Bull have got coming through. Liam Lawson, is the elephant in the room, really. He did outperform Yuki when they were face to face, albeit 5 or 6 races, but Liam Lawson did look the better of the two in those races, which shouldn't really have happened, in that kind of, from Yuki's point of view, and things like that, it can't really help, in terms of in that sense. And the fact that the Honda connection disappears in sort of a year, 2 years time, who knows? Listen, we could be waffling here in it, and Yuki's, seen as the future in terms of at Red Bull, but I just don't see it. I don't
think so.
I think it will be Lawson.
I don't think so.
I can't see a scenario where Lawson isn't in that seat. Whether Danny Brick gets promoted or not, I just can't see a scenario where Liam Lawson won't be driving for the Racing Bulls. I almost said Visa RB again.
I don't know though, mate. Yeah, I don't know if you saw though, but on Ted's, I don't know, I can't remember what it's called, Ted's paddock walk or whatever it is. That's it, yeah, Ted's notebook. He said that Tsunoda is actually, in the 5 to 8 year old demographic, the most popular Formula One driver.
I can see it. Listen, I really like Yuki. I think he's fantastic. For me, he's the perfect kind of like midfield team driver, because he's just entertaining. He just produces brilliant races from time to time. He can have chaotic moments, good and bad. And I actually really like the midfield in terms of drivers. I just wish they had slightly better cars where they could maybe get in the points more consistently. But it'll be interesting, that dynamic, how it develops over the season. It will be very interesting. Obviously, we'll talk about the Ferrari boys as well, in terms of Charles and Carlos. I think without fully knowing the details of how bad that Charles Leclerc brake issue was, I've got a different view on it now. I think at the time, I was like, just let them race. In terms of it's fun to watch. Ferrari aren't fighting for championships. What's the worst that can happen, really? In terms of if they go wheel to wheel, seconds to fourth, it doesn't really make a difference for Ferrari. It's the same for any kind of team outside that. It's just you just want to maximize what you can out of the car. But in terms of that, having known that now that how bad Charles' brake issue was, I don't understand why Ferrari just didn't ask Charles to get out of the way and maybe just take a little bit less time out of Carlos's race pace, because he'd probably lost a second there going wheel to wheel with Charles. He finished 3 seconds behind Perez. Who knows? Who knows? Could that have been more doable? I don't think it would have been. I'm just, putting it out there. Maybe that could have been more doable. But I think over the race, I think Charles was still probably the faster driver in terms of, had it been a level playing field. I think some of the narrative of, Ferrari, we've sacked the wrong driver. Don't bring in Hamilton. Cancel the contract. That's a massive overreaction. I think there's no doubt about it. In qualifying, especially, you saw the gap between the two. And Carlos still had a really, really good race. And I'm excited to see Carlos this season, because he is fighting for his future, not his future in F1 so much, but his future at a top team. In terms of having that chance to win races and compete for championships. He's got to perform this season to still live that dream.
He's going to have a bee in his bonnet in a way. He, like you said, he does have something to prove. I think he did look good. He won Driver of the Day as well, if I'm not mistaken. I know that's just voted for by the public, isn't it? It's not, it's not voted for by anyone, with much expertise or anything like that. It's not voted for by the other drivers or anything like that. But But yeah, driver of the day.
Are you saying it's voted by people like me and you, basically?
Yes, mate. Yes,
Fair
yeah.
enough.
But no, I think it was fair. Stroll could have won it as well, to be fair. But yeah, I think yeah, like I said, he's got to be in his point. He's got something to prove. He could end up at a big team. Could he end up at Mercedes, mate? Could he end up at Mercedes, Carlos Sainz?
It's possible.
Aston, maybe Aston Martin.
Yeah, Aston's a shout. I hadn't even really thought of Aston, but yeah, it's a shout if Fernando does move to Mercedes. I mean, a lot of it depends, I think, on two things really: car performance and how Mercedes see people like George Russell, for example. Do they see him full on the next Lewis Hamilton, or do they see him more as a Nico Rosberg, where they need to bring someone else in alongside another top tier driver alongside him to maximize the car? It depends, really. It's hard to say. I think I'm probably more leaning towards. I don't know. I don't really know which. I kind of change my mind on that each week.
I think we're going to see a lot of that from Sainz. I don't think he's going to listen too much to team orders this year. I really don't. If there are any, I think he's going to want to fight Leclerc, because look, Leclerc's got his seat no matter what. We know that, right? Even if he has a shocker this season, he'll still be there, because I think Leclerc is seen as like a golden boy, of Ferrari. You might want to disagree with me, mate.
Rightly so. Come on.
I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm just saying I think he's going to be there no matter what. And I think Sainz, he's without a team as it stands. I think he's going to want to finish, as many races as he can above Leclerc to not only try and find the seat, but also to say to Ferrari, like you said, you have sat the wrong guy. And we know they haven't. We know that, out of the two, Sainz is the one who had to go. But I think he'll be wanting to kind of, prove them wrong a little bit and pick up as many points as possible. So I think we'll see a lot of wheel to wheel. I think we'll see a lot of wheel to wheel between both of them. And I think Leclerc might I think the relationship's changed definitely between the two with the news that he's leaving. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting one to watch. Even last year they were fighting wheel to wheel at times, mate, and ignoring team orders every now and then. So this year I think it will only there'll only be more of that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the argument about have they sat the wrong driver is totally null and void. It's clear that they haven't. It's clear that we've not done that. With in terms of the driver switch. I think if Carlos can finish the season, a couple of attempts off Leclerc, he's got a real chance of staying in a top team, because a Mercedes will think, yeah, alongside Russell, that could work quite well, or Aston might think. Because I think the thing with Carlos, I think his biggest strength is, listen, he's a massively talented driver. There's no question about that. But his biggest thing is his brain. I think his racing IQ, how he reads a race. He almost picks a strategy on his side of the garage kind of thing. And there's no question about that. He has overruled his race engineers so many times, in the last sort of 2 years or so. That's his big strength. And I do think that characteristic will appeal to your Mercedes or your Aston Martins. Your Aston Martins probably do need a leader if Fernando moves on. I think Red Bull's a stretch. I just don't see Jos Verstappen and Carlos Sainz Sr. I think there's too much bad blood there for that to from when they were at the Toro Rosso days, etc., etc. I just can't really see that as a realistic one. But Mercedes, Aston, who knows? And Audi obviously is the one where I think I can't see that as much now, in terms of it's a risky one in terms of Carlos, but it won't surprise me if he does go to Sauber, who will obviously become Audi in 2026 as things stand. So it is an interesting dynamic that. But yeah, I didn't expect for 1 minute that Carlos would back down. He's fighting for his top tier F1 future. There's no question about it at all, and that is only a good thing for Ferrari. I think the side I've seen of Sainz since the second bit of last season, as I said, I've seen a different side to Sainz in terms of what is a side I like about him, a nastier side to Sainz. And it's not necessarily with Leclerc. I just think in his racing style and that lot, he's a lot more aggressive now than what he was previously. Certain moves he went for yesterday, he wouldn't have done that this time last year for me. I mean, he's getting more and more confident with the car. And it was just some really encouraging performance. And that is why I really do believe, this season we can see, a really top season from Leclerc and Sainz to get Ferrari into positions in the constructors that they probably shouldn't be in. Realistically, you know, if Checo's on it, Max is on it, Red Bull will win the constructors by like 300 or 400 points. But I just have that feeling with Sainz and Leclerc, they'll be able to maximise enough races. Checo will be inconsistent over the season. They won't be as far back on that as what people think, and they will be able to win the odd race. The problem is, if there's a scenario where Max is out of a race and it's Leclerc and Sainz fighting for first place, that's where it becomes more of a problem in terms of the teammate rivalry. But yeah, we'll see. We say it can become a problem, but if Ferrari are in any kind of scenario this season where they're fighting for first and second, I will be buzzing. So it's not that much of an issue. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm not overly concerned about it. I think both are sensible drivers. They've got wise heads on the shoulders, because obviously Sainz can't go too far in terms of being too competitive with Leclerc, because then you show the team that might sign him a different side to him, kind of thing. It's a bit more, I'm not sure about that kind of thing. You know, if he can turn like that. I think Fred as well will manage it well. I think he's,
yes.
You know, and he's talking a little bit more about Fred in terms of I think he's doing a really good job at Ferrari. And I think that side of things, I'm a lot calmer with. I think under Binotto, he wouldn't have had a clue how to deal with this situation at all. I think he'd have just put it off and off and off and off and off, and it becomes more of an issue kind of thing that it shouldn't be. I think with Fred, he can handle that situation.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a decent relationship with both, you know, in terms of... I think if you're Carlos Sainz, you've got to be realistic as well. Lewis Hamilton came available. You know what I mean? To a team like Ferrari, in the situation we've been in for the last sort of 10, 15 years, you can't turn that down if you're Ferrari. He is very unlucky to lose his seat, Carlos Sainz. I do think, but it's not wrong, if you know what I mean, at the same time as well. I think circumstances go the other way. I don't see any other scenario where Carlos Sainz would have lost his seat, to be honest. It's just the way things go. But yeah, I'm sure he'll give a good account of himself this season, and there's not a chance he's not going to end up. He's not going to end up at a Williams, for example. You know, no disrespect to Williams, he's not going to end up that low down. He's not got a Checo situation potentially, or a, trying to think of other drivers. You know, other drivers though, it's kind of outside of Red Bull and Ferrari. He's not got that kind of scenario to play with, but it would be quite funny if Sainz ended up at Mercedes. You know, they did a switch kind of thing. But I think if you're George Russell, I think you'd rather that than Fernando Alonso coming across to your garage kind of thing. I think Russell would still have the measure of Sainz, maybe to a lesser extent than what Charles has, but I think he'd be quite comfortable with that.
Yeah, and there's also talk about Antonelli as well, mate. Maybe he makes a step up.
Well, let's talk. Did you see any of the F2 race yesterday?
No, mate. No.
Well,
no, I didn't.
I mean, I am going to try and watch more F2 this season. Now, maybe we'll do, or one of us will do some more videos on F2 this season potentially, because it is an interesting season. But Antonelli was a very interesting one over the weekend. Driving for Prema. Prema traditionally have always been, most years have always been the top team in F2. Some years by a big distance. But qualifying went horribly wrong, and it looks like the car is nowhere near as dominant. And in terms of Antonelli, it was talk about winning the F2 Championship and getting that step up to Mercedes. But now it looks like a different dynamic. Antonelli started the race 17th, I think, yesterday in the slowest car and finished 10th. So it's very impressive on his debut. He totally outperformed Ollie Behrman, and Ollie Behrman was probably the favourite going into this season. Ferrari Junior as well. That is no mean feat. Antonelli is definitely. The only reason I've gone on to sidetrack onto that is Antonelli is definitely someone to consider for Mercedes. I don't think they will, to be honest, unless he is consistently this good every single race, which he could well be. I still think they'll probably go more down the Alonso or Sainz route. Maybe Albon, but probably more likely Alonso or Sainz, I'd have thought.
Well, Antonelli has probably got 25 years of his career left still in motorsport, mate. There is no rush whatsoever. Born in 2006, mate. How does that make that makes me feel old? And I think you're older than me, mate, anyway. So that must make you feel old.
It does, mate. It absolutely does. It's like Michael Schumacher had left Ferrari before Antonelli was born, or just after Antonelli was born, which is absolutely mental. But yeah, listen, I can't say I've seen a lot of Antonelli, but certainly yesterday, some of the moves he was pulling off.
Yeah.
Wow. Kind
We'll
of thing.
we'll do a video on him, of course. I mean, we'll there's plenty of time. We'll see more F2 as the season goes on, and we'll have to do a video. And
that will be the most interesting series this year in terms of tightness. It's going to be really, because Prema will probably come back, and Behrman, Antonelli, Mercedes, Toto will, if he has to sort the car out himself, will not be having his wonder kid in a worse car in F2. It just won't happen. It will be, even if you have to manipulate the rules, Toto will not be having that. I can imagine him on the phone now to the F2 or whatever. You know what I mean? He will not be having that. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but you know what I mean. But yeah, mate. I mean, I don't know if there's any more to add. Really, obviously, we'll be doing a driver ratings or grades as well, and yeah, we'll probably be doing that next. And posted, I guess, unless there's anything else you referred to from race day number 1.
No, I think that's it, mate. We'll get as much content out as possible. Obviously, we'll be
we'll
having
just
a
do
couple
one
more
more
videos.
thing. We'll do one, driver of the day. We'll do one between us, okay?
Okay.
Best driver, worst driver, okay, of yesterday. We'll do it at the same time. Best driver, 3,
Wait,
2,
hold on. Give me
1.
a sec. We
haven't discussed this beforehand. I just thought we'll throw it in. It'd be interesting just doing it at the same time if we're going to go the same.
Yeah, mate. Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so driver of the day and worst driver of the day.
Okay, driver of the day.
3, 2, 1. Max Verstappen.
Max. Yeah. Both
okay.
Max.
I was thinking maybe he might go Carlos, but I personally think it was 100% Max yesterday. Okay, worst driver of the day yesterday. A bit more challenging this one. Bit more challenging.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's go, mate. Let's go.
I just it's going to be. Let me just have a quick look at the driver standings yesterday. I just want to make sure of something. I just want to, before I do this. 1 second. Let me just make sure on this one.
He's doing his due diligence before he throws out a harsh answer, I reckon.
There's not an outrageously obvious one.
Not.
That's the thing. It is. Oh, I feel so bad doing this. Okay.
I've got mine, mate. I'm ready.
3, 2, 1. Pierre Gasly.
Ooh.
Yeah. Ooh, okay.
Yeah, Bottas, mate. Gasly. Yeah, it's an interesting one, mate. It's an interesting one, Pierre.
It wasn't an outrageously bad drive from Gasly at all. It's just the fact Ocon was better on race day and in quali. But again, there wasn't a lot in it. I just think with Bottas, that 52-second pit stop. I mean, actually, Bottas, thinking about it, how badly he got outperformed by Zhou. Yeah, I hadn't even thought. Yeah, it's got to be Bottas, hasn't it? Actually, yeah.
I'm going to go with that. Yeah.
I was focusing too much on that 52-second pit stop when I was thinking that Zhou, how badly he outperformed him. Yeah, it's got to be Bottas, actually. Yeah, Valtteri. Sorry, Valtteri, but it's you.
So we both agreed. On both of them. Verstappen, best. Bottas, worst. That'll do, mate. That'll do for the first video. As we said, we'll get, there'll be loads of content coming out on the channel. We'll, have news videos whenever there's breaking news in Formula One. We'll get it out on the channel. And of course, there is a driver ratings video coming soon over the next couple of days. And we'll have much more content over the next race weekend as well for qualifying reaction and race reaction, of course, just like this one.
Please hit that subscribe button. I'm going to also do some data analysis from each race weekend. So currently working on the bit of pace data between teammates and teams on quali and races. So if you are interested in the data, I'm going to try and make it as fun as possible. But it's quite interesting, some of the things. I mean, did you know, Logs, that yesterday, I can't quite take the credit for this, but there was findings that Nico Hülkenberg was actually faster on race pace than the Aston Martins.
Wow.
And that was that first incident. It was that first lap incident that killed him in terms of getting a result. So it's just little things like that. So it was interesting. Anyway, guys, we will leave it there. Hit that like button and subscribe button, and comment as well. Comment on who you support. And yeah, if you want more fan videos, more based on Ferrari, more based on McLaren, let us know on that as well, guys. And we will leave it there as Locks does the honours and hits that top right button.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Cheers,
See you soon.
guys.